Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, worshippers of all ages, welcome back to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor, and today we are going to be finishing up our ranked recommendations here for Season 17, talking about Tier 8 aircraft carriers. Now, I know this is not everybody's favorite subject, right? But even if you don't intend to play an aircraft carrier in ranked, you should probably go in armed with a little bit of knowledge about what you're likely to see, and maybe if you've never played an aircraft carrier, which is a lot of people, what you might be up against, like what you should be looking out for, okay? And also a quick PSA while I'm here. Guys, I've seen a lot of posts on forums and Reddit and stuff later, people talking about grief in aircraft carriers. Just don't do that. Don't do that. If you don't like the class, man, talk to Wargaming, work with them, right? Don't harass players in game. That's never okay. Alright, so let's start in here with the recommended list. This will be a little shorter video than some of the other ones. First up, we must recommend Tier 8 Premium American Carrier, USS Enterprise. Enterprise was one of the first carriers that I really enjoyed playing way back in the old RTS days. And for me, she's retained that status in the new system. She has fairly deep reserves of aircraft, and she puts up more attack aircraft, the infamous rocket planes, in a flight than any other Tier 8 carrier. When you marry that squadron, that attack aircraft squadron, to the 5-inch American HVARS rockets and her particularly quirky, narrow, and wide target reticle, she makes for an excellent destroyer hunter. Every destroyer in the game has to respect Enterprise's attack squadrons and have a plan to deal with them if they want to stay in the game. Additionally, she's the only American carrier to bring armor-piercing dive bombs to a fight, and she drops 6 of them into a fairly nice little reticle. Her AP bombs do have less penetration than those of Shokaku or the German carriers, but they will still Citadel cruisers and many battleships in this tier just fine. On top of all of that, her torpedo squadrons are still very serviceable, and she has the fastest torpedo plane regeneration in the tier. What will really piss off the enemy carrier, though, are the size of her fighter squadrons. A ludicrously trolly 10 fighter planes. Simply put, Big E is a massive toolbox of aircraft that can be utilized in nearly any combat situation, married to fighter squadrons large enough to make a difference. She is the complete package for players who want to rank out in an aircraft carrier. Our other recommended pick is Tier 8 Japanese carrier Shokaku. If Enterprise is one side of a coin, then Shokaku is the other. Like her premium American counterpart, all of her squadrons are highly usable against a mix of ship types. As a Japanese carrier, she has some of the most potent torpedoes of all Tier 8 flat tops, and while she may only launch them in pairs, they move fast, hit hard, and have pretty good flood chances. She brings AP bombs to the party, dropping them in groups of 3, capable of citadeling basically every cruiser she'll face, and, like Enterprise, many of the battleships as well. Her rockets are an extreme threat to enemy destroyers, with a full volley actually doing more damage than a full volley of Enterprises. She fires those rockets into a smaller reticle that does require a little more practice and finesse to lead properly, but they are devastating against lighter enemy units, mostly light cruisers and destroyers, if she lands enough of them. Her planes are generally faster to get around the board than those of Enterprise, and she has overall shallower reserves on deck and longer regen rates, so more caution is required when choosing targets. But with all of that said, Shokaku is still an excellent pick for a carrier for players who don't own an Enterprise, because she gets very nearly the same tools in her toolbox as Big E, just with a slightly different set of advantages and disadvantages to them in terms of squadron sizes and plane speeds. Scrolling on to honorable mentions, let's look at Tier 8 Premium Japanese carrier Kaga. Kaga is built for doing one thing better than any other Tier 8 aircraft carrier, and that is murdering capital ships. She has obscene plane reserves already on her deck, nearly 100 aircraft, and her torpedo strikes can be absolutely devastating if she lands a full salvo. She's the only Japanese carrier to mount high explosive bombs, and she doesn't screw around with this. Her planes mount 1,100-pound HE bombs that are roughly equivalent to those found aboard Tier 8 American carrier USS Lexington. Her weak squadron is her attack aircraft, which is really good news for destroyers. Kaga does fire the same rockets as Shokaku. She just doesn't fire very many of them, and her squadron sizes for the rocket planes is honestly pretty small. Actively killing destroyers is not what Kaga does best, though I will point out that the HE bombs will do bad things to destroyers if she gets to deploy them in that fashion. No, players who take a Kaga into a rank match are hunting the biggest game of all, enemy battleships, and they do it better than anyone else in the tier. It's worth noting that Kaga has the absolute worst anti-aircraft suite of any Tier 8 carrier, so she's actually the most vulnerable to getting sniped by the enemy CV if she isn't careful. She also has some other tricks up her sleeve with regards to the stealth of her hull and planes, but that's for another video. Suffice to say, Kaga is a really solid pick for rank, provided that your team is willing to shoot at destroyers when she spots them, because the tools she has to hunt them herself are a little on the limited side. We also got to talk about Tier 8 premium German carrier, Graf Zeppelin. Now, I very nearly didn't make this pick, but the longer I looked at the numbers, the more I realized I really needed to. GZ has had a very checkered development history in World of Warships, even more so post-rework. I don't think any single carrier in the game has been nerfed and changed quite as much as she has. Her main gimmicks are twofold. She has very fast dive and torpedo bombers, which we now know are the Tier 10 German carrier aircraft, and a meme-worthy suite of secondaries that allows her to wreck lighter enemy units that wander too close. Her torpedo squadrons are really the bread and butter here. They race around the map at speeds that no other planes in this tier can match. Her AP dive bombers are equally quick, but the usefulness of those bombs is severely hampered by her, frankly, badly designed drop reticle. Conversely, Zeppelin has the slowest attack aircraft in the tier, and they fire the German equivalent of the American Tiny Tim rocket. Now, that may sound awful, but it comes with a weird advantage. It allows you to line up and execute drops even against destroyers that have their AA turned off if you find them with the right timing and coming in at the right angle. These planes are so slow that even if you don't detect a destroyer until you're basically on top of them, you can probably still get a drop off. If you do choose to play a GZ, please, I would recommend make sure and try and focus out the enemy battleships as quickly as possible. In the late game, your secondaries give you the ability to do horrid things to enemy destroyers and many cruisers that wander too close, but your hull will not stand up to battleship fire for very long. Now, Tier 8 has more carriers than any other tier, so who finds themselves on the naughty list here on this? And these might be questionable picks, but I'm going to point them out anyway. The first is Tier 8 premium British carrier HMS Indomitable. Anybody who's looked at carrier stats over on one of the stat aggregation sites lately may have noticed that Indomitable does more damage than any other Tier 8 carrier on every server in the game. Why on earth, then, does a ship that does its only job this well find itself on the naughty list? Well, for me, there's a couple reasons that I would highly encourage players to avoid Indomitable in ranked. One is that a tremendous amount of her damage output is built upon the fires that her bombs and rockets set. And you don't get to choose, right? The prevalence of those fires and everything is all completely up to RNG. You know, roll with the dice. Let's see, do I get a fire? Oh, yay. Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. Who knows? The other is that having only two types of aircraft, that's the attack aircraft and the British level bombers, is a lot more restrictive than it might appear at first glance. The huge health pools of our planes is a definite advantage, and it's possible. I'd say it's even likely there are a few master level carrier players out there who could bully their way to rank 1 in this ship. But for most of us mere mortals, it simply isn't practical. I suggest leaving Indomitable at home. And the other pick here is Tier 8 premium American carrier USS Saipan. I find this one to be a little disappointing personally. Of all the Tier 8 carriers, Saipan has been the most vexing for me to learn how to play. In theory, she should clean up in this format, right? She's fairly stealthy, and she's throwing Tier 10 planes, basically, at Tier 8 ships. That should allow her to do horrible things. The math is hugely in her favor in all of the anti-aircraft matchups she's going to find herself in. And again, like Indomitable, a carrier player with enough battles and experience under the belt can probably get this ship to perform in ranked. But if you're like me, and carriers are an interesting occasional diversion in World of Warships and not your main focus, chances are you're going to struggle to get this ship to perform the way you probably want it to. Enemy fighter squadrons of all kinds will absolutely troll her to the point that pressing home an attack against a ship with a catapult fighter up will cost her several minutes worth of plane regeneration. Those kinds of trades are awful for the damage output she gets out of most of her attacks. Now, I will admit, the torpedo squadrons hit like anvils when you land all four, especially against ships in this tier that have lower end torpedo protection, say a North Carolina or a Vladivostok. But unless you have a ton of new carrier experience and just want the extra challenge of ranking out in a Saipan, I would really encourage you to grab nearly any other carrier for your ranked grind. The toolbox here, the options you have are just a little too limiting in my opinion. Alright guys, there we go. Quick look through Tier 8 carriers. You probably will see everybody at least once. So come with a plan. You will see planes, you will see carriers. Take defensive fire, invest in BFT, take that November Echo set of 7 flag. Trust me guys, AA skills are not worthless. Every carrier player in this game grins hugely when they hear you say that. Trust me. Wash your hands, be safe out there, and I'll catch you next time.